Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to the Muslim Podcaster Show. I'm your host Majid, and today I'm joined by a special guest joining me from Canada, Brother Abdul Ahad. Assalamu alaikum, bro, and welcome back to the show.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, Majid. It's always a pleasure to be here. Barakallahu feek.
Yes, mashallah. If you probably recall, we last recorded just after October the 7th, so I think it was last October.
Yes.
How have you been keeping since then? Everything good?
Alhamdulillah, at the end of the day, although my situation is good, there's just we always have this fikr for Ahl al-Ghazza, and Ahl al-Lubnan and all the Muslimin who are suffering around the world.
100%, bro.
Yeah.
100%. And that's the thing. So sometimes that's the danger you see. When the hype cools down, people get on with their lives. And sometimes you have to, in this sort of like society we're living in and the sort of daily grind, sometimes you have to keep actually actively reminding yourself about what's happening. You know what I mean? Because when it's fresh, everyone's talking about it. You know, it's almost like more difficult not to talk about it or to think about it. But then the plan is, that hopefully after a little while, people will become bored or numb to what's happening. Probably more correct, and they just carry on with their life, man. But yeah, we have to actively remember, our brothers and sisters all over the world. But certainly what's happening in Gaza and what has been happening. But yeah, I'm sure we'll get into uh, plenty more of this. So, bro, we had a plan of recording, I think 3, 4 days ago, probably a week ago.
Yeah.
Um, that never happened, but Alhamdulillah, you're here now. And what I wanted to do is, at that time, our plan was to discuss the the ICC arrest warrant for Netanyahu and Gallant, and then
Mhm.
sort of bounce off there and go into any direction we choose really. So I mean, to get into the actual episode itself, what's your thoughts on the arrest warrant? Do you think
Mhm.
that this is something which is genuine? Do you think this is something that's gonna bring about any justice? What's your thought on this, bro? And also the
Yeah.
timing as well. So yeah, yeah, over to you, man.
Yeah, of course. Bismillah. So the thing about the arrest warrant, there's particular context that we must understand when analyzing this particular thing. From I guess you could say, a political scientist kind of perspective. This is what I've been studying. And in international relations, when looking at a particular scenario, international relations being, the study of interactions between nations, states, global actors, you have to look at particular lenses. There are two particular lenses, and the latter lens that I'll mention is the one that I subscribe to when understanding whatever's happening in the world. The first one is this idea that we call liberal institutionalism. You could almost say it's like a madhab within international relations, if you want to put it. It's like a secular madhab. And liberal institutionalism says that basically, um, there is further international cooperation between states and various actors. And that is, of course, for example, with the formulation of the ICC in itself, it shows that, hey, we're able to work things out. I don't subscribe to that. I subscribe to something more of a neo-realist or a structural realist perspective of international relations, that where basically that emphasizes the role of power politics in international relations. It's based upon competition, gaining some degree of advantage in conflict and even cooperation as well. So the thing is that when we see the ICC ruling of it, a lot of people were celebrating it. But at the end of the day, the ICC also had a warrant on Yahya Sinwar. It also had a warrant on Ismail Hani. May Allah have mercy on both of them.
I mean,
Uh, the thing is that there was, of course, that normalization of the colonizer within the ICC. So we should never seek, as Muslimin, this adl, this justice from such organizations that are merely institutional. At the moment, these sort of efforts are merely being uh, partaken to satisfy a degree of inferior complexity that a lot of Muslims, a lot of Arabs even just have when it comes to sort of international support. So when it comes to this, do we celebrate it or whatnot? I mean, at the end of the day, France and the US at least, we've heard what they said about these warrants. They said that they are immune. Netanyahu is immune from such sort of arrest warrants. We have seen that at least in Canada under Trudeau, because of the amount of pressure that a lot of pro-Palestinians here in Canada have put upon our politicians, that he is pressured to actually subscribe to, hey, we're a founding member of the ICC, we have to subscribe to, if Netanyahu comes to Canada, we're going to arrest him. But at the end of the day, these are just merely symbolic tokens. These are merely symbolic ideas that just because it's something written on paper, at the end of the day, will it actually be actualized? Netanyahu has no business coming to any of these countries anytime soon, other than the US to go to the GA, the UNGA. So the thing is that for me, it's not really a nusra. It's not a victory. It's not like a badr for the Muslimin. It's merely just the game of politics once again being played, and it's just to appease the larger populations of various states to calm down when it comes to, for example, protesting, and whatnot. So I don't really see it as a victory.
Subhanallah, bro, some really good points there. And
Mm.
like you mentioned, bro, there are many people. I mean, probably because if you look at the last 14 months or so, Muslims may be kind of like starved for any good news when it comes to Gaza. So like you're saying, people have been celebrating this, and Muslims might then just turn around and basically, say, well, what you're saying really is just seeing things through a negative lens. And actually, this is something which we should sort of celebrate. But the sort of counter to that, and it actually is linked to what you talked about when you talked about international relations. I think the counter to that is to actually understand whether ICC can bring about any justice. We have to understand, I think, a few things. And I'm hoping that, with your background, we can delve into some of this. The first thing is the origins of international law. Then there's also the community, the concept of international community, which, if we look into this, we will see some selective application when it comes to these rules and laws, and plenty of hypocrisy. I mean, just to, sort of kick you off in terms of this topic, but if you look at even the origins of international law, is linked to the Treaty of Westphalia,
Mm-hmm.
which
Yeah.
was a Eurocentric, framework designed by and for the European powers, right? And
Mm-hmm.
even though this was the origins, the reality is it hasn't actually changed in essence. So just to get your thoughts on basically, international law, because ICC obviously is linked to this heavily. So if we can understand, international law, the origins, and basically who it's looking out for, I think that will give us a good idea as well for those people who may have some sort of like hope that something good will come from this.
Yeah. You mentioned a huge historical event that literally sums up almost everything. That when we talk about international law, when we talk about even the matter of human rights, when we talk about the idea of a state's right, all of these concepts came from the 17th century. They came from the Treaty of Westphalia, which of course was this treaty to have sort of limit the amount of conflict that was occurring in Europe in a Eurocentric context. And that was basically understanding these, instead of having frontiers, that states are expanding and sometimes not expanding, they're diminishing. They would just put actual barriers, actual borders for the first time in history, where if you violated someone's borders, that would be considered a crime. It was a means of benefit for stronger empires, and it was a means uh, of putting restraints upon smaller states at the time when looking at this. So the thing is that when we talk about international law, we are talking about a lot of the time the law of convenience. We're talking of a particular Machiavellian sense of law, what benefits and what can be perceived as something that is benevolent, but in reality is the quite the opposite when it comes to the actions of agenda. So when it comes to like this whole idea of the Treaty of Westphalia, we think about the whole notion that Zionists try to perpetuate, which is basically that Israel has a right to defend itself. This dubious kind of claim, whereby it ignores the fact that the first of all the colonial origins of Israel. It ignores the fact that Israel has been violating internationally agreed uh, international agreements that they would not expand into the West Bank yet. Seven decades later, it's still being expanded in, and now it's only recently that we hear one of Netanyahu's ministers, Ben Gavir, talk about expanding into Gaza. Subhanallah. So the thing is, at the end of the day, the reason why they're able to do this is because Palestine, in itself, in the state that it is currently in, where you have the West Bank government and then you have, of course, the government of Gaza, Israel is able to exploit this idea that, oh, Israel is defending itself and it is expanding for the sake of so-called national security. So it is by the very international law that it allows itself to go about the horrendous crimes that they're doing. And although perhaps at times international law, non-governmental organizations such as Amnesty may make a comment, about these particular series of events, and of course we do applaud everybody who takes a stand against Israel and makes a very profound statement and proving their crimes. The thing is, at the end of the day, they're merely speaking in a context of an inferior complexity, and they're ignoring the larger sort of state actors such as the U.S. That are really just controlling what is happening.
Yeah, bro. Just to build on that,
Yep.
you mentioned something that's really important. You mentioned benefit. Like
Mhm.
basically, it's the framework was designed for benefit, but I think something that's really important in the context of our discussion is who benefits. Because if you think about the principles of sovereignty and equality, even at the time of Treaty of Westphalia, right, it was applied only to civilized
Mhm.
nations, i.e., which were European nations. Basically, they were the
Mhm.
civilized ones. This didn't stop these same nations to go and colonize other lands, brutalize them, commit genocides, right? Because the reality is, who does it benefit? It was designed for their benefit, right? And there's a quote from Noam Chomsky when he said, "For the powerful, crimes are those that others commit." And that's what we're seeing now, where even though, and I think this is the important point that we want our listeners to take away is that when they say international law, it makes it seem universal, but the reality is it's not universal. It wasn't universal from the time it started, and even now, even though they call it international law, it was focused on European dominance. And today, obviously, you're talking about American dominance, but these are the same people who came from Europe, right? I
Mhm.
think that's the first thing that's really important to understand. And then when you can understand that, and we look at the ICC, um, and we can see that this is a tool for selective justice, if you can
Mhm.
even call it justice, right? I saw this clip from Lindsey Graham, that
Yes.
American senator, and paraphrasing, he said something on the lines that the ICC wasn't set up to hold countries like France, Germany, America. Well, America's not a signee, but these Western nations, it wasn't set up for trying, bringing people like this to trial, right? Um, and and also, if you think about actually ICC and you look at the history, we can see that it's disproportionately targeted African leaders, right? So even though now you have this tool, this world court that's been set up, if you look at its history, it shows that, you know, it's a tool for the Western nations to be
Yeah.
used against those other nations that it wants to subjugate, that it wants to subdue. And there's a quote from John Pilger when he said the ICC has become a court for African despots. Western
Hmm.
aggressors remain immune. And just a few examples would be um, Guantanamo Bay,
Hmm.
Abu Ghraib, right? So at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, this ICC that at the moment it seems like it's going on a crusade against the Zionists. Reality is, it's just a political tool. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. At the end of the day, you said it very well. It's for the white man's benefit. It's for that nor that Eurocentric white man's benefit. From the beginning, when we were discussing international law in the context of the Treaty of Westphalia to today, at the end of the day, like, I guess the only recent sort of case study you could argue against is that Putin was well, there was a warrant arrest for him in 2023 for, I think that the arrest was based upon kidnapping Ukrainian children. They were and also leading an invasion of Ukraine. But at the end of the day, that was just a matter of merely merely just merely just gaining some degree of leverage from the Western side of this conflict. But the thing is that, like, when we think about the ICC, you usually think about a lot of uh, black and brown sort of people being prosecuted, whether they committed crimes or not, of course, nevertheless. And when it comes to, will we ever see an American general be put in the ICC? It's the last thing we'll see. It's the last thing we'll see. And people, they're questioning, oh, um, why is it that the like we don't see an American general, for example, or an Israel, or even if there was a case, a large Israeli commander who would be arrested right away. The thing is that, I'll give you an example. Just when Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant were given that warrant arrest, the thing is that there was an American senator, I forgot his name. He basically threatened, and when Justin Trudeau gave his statement about that if Netanyahu were to come to
Same
Canada,
same guy, Lindsey Graham.
yeah, Lindsay, yeah, exactly, exactly. He literally threatened to sanction Canada if they were to arrest Netanyahu.
He
So
actually said we will crush their economy.
yeah, exactly. Like it, and the last time like like a war between Canada and the U.S. occurred is 1812. So at the end of the day, this it would be a historical thing. If that actually facilitated. But nevertheless, the thing is at the end of the day, it's for the white man's benefit. At the end of the day, and right now, even Justin Trudeau, when he said that, he was benefiting from that because he knows that you know I'm looking at a more of a national kind of lens. He knows right now he's losing the Muslim vote, um, big time, and he wants to appease both the Zionist Jewish community and also the pro-Palestinian Muslim community at the time. So the thing is, at the end of the day, he's just trying to find a way to have that white man's benefit. If that's a term we should coin it, that the white man's benefit.
Yeah, yeah, bro. And if you think about just building on what you're saying, when you mentioned, when you look in ICC and you look at the courts, trials, you see black people, brown people. In
Mm.
a way, just when you look at the old school colonialism, that
Mhm.
basically two-tier um, justice, where basically you have those people at the top, which are white Europeans, the civilized people, and then
Yep.
you have everyone else, which is uncivilized and needs to be brought to account. So when you look at this ICC, it's almost like and actually these guys have been saying this, like, look, the ICC wasn't designed to put allies of the West on trial. It wasn't designed for that. It was
Hmm.
designed for the African despots or the ones in the Middle East. So it's almost like, again, you've got this racism, I would argue, that you
Hmm.
had the white man at the top, the Europeans, the West, the so-called civilized world, and then you have this court, international court, for all these other people who are actually sovereign leaders in their own nations, right? Rather than them being held accountable and brought to justice within their own countries, you have this, court that's set up where these people are dragged along and brought to justice. You look at the mindset, and the first time now, obviously, Putin is something which is a bit of an anomaly.
Yeah.
However, he's not, because we know that they have their political objective behind him going in there, right? But just to see how, look how quick his arrest warrant came about, and it's taken a long time. And even though it's been taken, now there's an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. We have people like that David Lammy, politician in the government in the UK, saying, I will still, if he comes to UK, he'll be get arrested, but I will still be dealing with them as, the premier of their country. Now you think to yourself, wait a minute, this is a guy who's has an arrest warrant out on him. He's a criminal almost, right?
Hmm.
France, the same thing. What did France say? They said, well, you know what? We don't think this is lawful. It doesn't. The ICC doesn't have this jurisdiction. So we can see that what's actually happening. And I think also another key point here, bro, is, you mentioned about Trudeau and the Muslim vote. I think there's almost also an element where right now there's a big discussion going on, and that discussion is that, has Gaza become the graveyard for Western values and Western civilization, because they have contradicted everything they believe in the last 13, 14 months. So
Hmm.
even now, when this ICC warrant is, sent out, we want these people. It's almost like some of them think, well, look, we can't be so blatant. We have to say, well, look, we've signed we're participants of the Rome Treaty. We have to abide by this. Whilst others are using sneaky tactics of trying to get around this. But again, to the third person, to the average person, it shows hypocrisy,
Hmm.
you know. So just moving on, bro,
Yeah.
into the issue of international community, right? Again, it's something which, the same way like international law, international community sounds very universal. Okay. What are your thoughts on this restricted club called the international community?
Well, basically, when discussing this idea of the international community, um, this is a term that's used in a geopolitical sense in IR, and it's a very broad sort of group of people, government. Whenever I think of the term, I think about the General Assembly, you know, in the UN. But nevertheless, the thing is that at the end of the day, it's as you said before when discussing the Treaty of Westphalia, it was only dealing with states that are from civilized that states that are civilized. It's not recognizing, for example, a Muslim sultanate, outside. Even the case of Afghanistan recently, I think it only recently that they're allowed to in the UN, or I think there's some discussion when it comes to that. Nevertheless, the thing is, at the end of the day, the international community is a very specific, a very broad. Sorry, it's a very, although it's a broad term, it's a very specified context. That's how I would put it. And the thing is that that context is only those who recognize one another. So the thing is that a lot of the time you'll never find, for example, um politicians, or even, like, if he was alive, Yahya Sinwar, come to the be considered part of the international community, um, as a leader of resistance, as a people's person. That is, he's high, that everybody was under in Gaza. You'll only find, for example, in this international community, Palestinians who are either two-state solutioners, such as Mahmoud Abbas, other sort of mutabia, other sorts of normalizers, So at the end of the day, it's very when we talk about the international community, we're talking about the international community that benefits the larger hegemonic powers such as the US, such as the UK, such as those in the Security Council.
Yeah, exactly, bro. And I think the Security Council is a good example because we know there's five nations who have the veto, and
Yep.
three of them are, Western states with France, Britain, and the US. And there's also a quote from Boutros Ghali in 1994. He said, "The UN is only as effective as its member states allow it to be." And we can see this, and you can see how when people were talking about, okay, now Putin has invaded Ukraine, and the question that's asked is, what will the international community do? Will the international community stand idle in this oppression? Right?
Mhm.
So it's almost like it's a few. I mean, we know. I mean, we probably don't have time on this podcast, but we know the reasons for what's happening in Ukraine, and
Mhm.
we know why Putin had to do what he did, right?
Mhm.
But the way the West will show it as this is just some guy who, unprovoked, has invaded Ukraine. But even though there's only certain countries who are benefiting from this, who are actually dictating what's happening, they try to make it a universal international issue, right? So, for example, if Imran Khan travels to Russia on the eve, on the day when Russia invades Ukraine, that's seen as, you're going onto the wrong side, right? But actually,
Mhm.
wait a minute, it's just an issue with a few states. In reality, it's the US and Russia, right? It's a bit of a proxy war. But the way they're trying to make it as if the whole world has to do something about it. So what did we see? We saw how the West um, was
Mhm.
pushing this thing about Ukraine. I'm not sure in Canada, but here, for example, just the normal people, normal English people have Ukrainian flags hanging outside the houses, in schools. You have these bracelets, Ukrainian ones, that kids go in, even though the same children, if they went in with the Palestinian one, they are told not to show any political signs. Um,
Mhm.
so when you were talking about the swift action on the invasion of Ukraine, a good sign then for people who are listening, certainly Muslims, is how the international community has remained silent or actually is complicit. Let's be serious, complicit on the decades and decades of crimes, the Zionist crimes, whether it's settlements, whether it's what happened in the blockade, whether it's the targeting civilians, all of these things that have been happening for 70 plus years. In fact, let's say as is, bro. Who is
Mhm.
it who gave the mandate and set up and announced that this Zionist state exists? It was the UN. It was the
Mhm.
so-called international community. So I
Yep.
think that's important for Muslims to understand that reality is there is no international community, because if you look at how this so-called international community treats Muslims,
Mhm.
then you'll see, like you mentioned, you know, if Yahya Sinwar was to go on as some, he would never be accepted. Why?
Exactly.
Because he's not part of that clique. He's not
Mhm.
part of that. He's not accepted, right? So I think that's something which is important for Muslims to understand, that this concept of international community, if it hasn't already been destroyed and crumbled in their heads,
Mhm.
it should do now, because when you look at the origins of it, it's solely there to look after certain interests of certain key players.
Mhm. Now I'm remembering these quotes by Noam Chomsky. He word for word spoke about this concept of international community, and he basically said that it's no other than the US, its allies, and its client states. He was talking in a Cold War context. Samuel Huntington also said that it was synonymous with the free world when they used to use that term as well. So the thing is, at the end of the day, Muslims should be very wary. Do not um, make a connotation between our concept of ummah and the concept of international community, because the international community, it's a very specified community. It's a community that has particular values, that has particular actions that they are complicit in, where they have allowed this genocide in Gaza to happen. And it is not the general populace, the international community. It is specified actors who have interests.
Yeah, exactly, bro. So when you look at it from that point of view, then I think it's important that Muslims have to refer back to Islam in all matters. So you know
Mm.
how you mentioned at the beginning when you said, you mentioned two sort of lenses.
Yeah.
I think what's key for Muslims is because Islam is a comprehensive deen, right? Um, Relations between states is something which is also part of Islam. It's not like this is some secular type of science, right?
Mhm.
So when Muslims view political events or view the world, they have to look at it through that lens of Islam,
Mhm.
right? They have to look at it through the lens of Islam. They have to look at it from the point of view of the ayats of the Quran, what it says about the enemies, what it says about the disbelievers, what it says about who to take as awliya, and all these things, and then gauge political events to see, okay, is this in the interest of Muslims or is it not in the interest of Muslims? Well, what's
Mhm.
your thoughts on that?
Yeah. No, that's very well said. At the end of the day, as Muslimin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us this objective criterion, the Quran, that discusses matters from not just the individual, but of course societal implications of how to deal with particular groups of people, how to deal with particular disbelievers, how to deal with particular kinds of peoples, kinds of systems. And at the end of the day, a lot of these secular sciences that even I mentioned, for example, the comparative method of understanding, for example, international relations, a lot of the times these methods actually come from the Muslimin, like Ibn Khaldun, for example. He's this is a famous social scientist who found such sort of degrees of methodology. So the thing is at the end of the day, this comparative method, when dealing with various entities of factions of different kinds of sort of levels of these factions, be it the individual, be it the states, Muslimin have to be able to overcome this idea of overgeneralizations. A lot of the times, Muslims, for example, and I see this happen quite a bit in the context of being the diaspora here. When a Muslim, for example, a Muslim pro-Palestinian is debating a Zionist, the Zionist will say, "Oh, I'm for peace. I'm for peace," And what he means is he means that I'm for the status quo to occur again, where basically Israel dominates Palestine, expands its settlements, imprisons more innocent Palestinians under administrative detention. No sort of degree of courts for them to be allowed to be judged, and sometimes years pass by. I could go on with the amount of crimes that Israel has done to the Muslimin of Palestine, but the thing is, at the end of the day, Muslimin need to understand. When we all remember when the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, he literally used the term that we are peacemakers. And this was a few months back, and we all remember that basically, you know, it was everybody was starting to spread these posts about from Surah Al-Baqarah referring to the Munafiqun specifically, that they claim to be peacemakers, but of course they are far from that. So at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a criterion, and we should always use that lens, and we should not be subject to generalizations. We should look into every aspect of it from the individual aspect, of how leaders are dealing with it, how the people are dealing with it, how various kinds of people are dealing with it, to how states are dealing with it. These lenses I mentioned, liberal institutionalism, neo-realism, which is also considered structural realism. At the end of the day, these are just subjective lenses to help us understand particular context, or at least how people understand uh, matters of international relations. But at the end of the day, they're subjective. They are not universal. Whereas the Islamic model is universal to every single aspect of our life, from deciding our dietary restrictions to how governance should be.
Yeah, subhanallah, subhanallah. So you mentioned the generalization.
Yeah,
And you expand on that a little,
yeah,
in terms of, in terms of what you mean when people generalize on these sort of events. Also, would just to get your thoughts on this as well. If what I'm thinking you mean is the fact that people, Muslims, they're not looking at the details, they're not looking at, they're not reading between the lines, and that's why we see, for example, Muslims allying with other people who supposedly are pro-Palestine,
yeah,
pushing different causes. Do you know what I mean? People getting sucked
yeah,
into things because they're generalizing, right?
yeah. At the end of the day, like, yeah, like we could discuss, of course, that whole matter of, as Ahl Sunnah, as Muslimin following the Quran and the Sunnah, allying ourselves with particular Shia groups such as Hezbollah, such as Iran, ignoring what happened in Syria. At the end of the day, the thing is that a lot of the times, building, like, basically building off of that, people are not really understanding the whole notion of seeking justice as Muslims and seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's approval. A lot of the times, we may, for example, see that, and I've seen this a lot in pro-Palestinian protests here in Montreal, where they will ally themselves with particular communist, particular socialist groups here, based in Montreal, even the Communist Party of Canada. And the thing is, these people also venerate Mao Zedong. They venerate the People's Party, the People's Republic of China. They venerate, they deny the Uyghur genocide. At the end of the day, I'm always going to remember the hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pure and only accepts what is pure. And when we ally ourselves with an oppressor, we are just merely losing the barakah, losing the whole essence of purity when it comes to the whole notion of muqawama, of resistance. And although, for example, we have seen, Iran, for example, uh, throw a few missiles here and there into Israel, cause some degree of infrastructural damage. Although we have seen the same with Hezbollah, the thing is, that does not make them immune to what has happened in Syria. The Muslimin in Idlib are still suffering under Assad, Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah, and this isn't. And a lot of the times they have, and the people of Idlib have even been accused of supporting Israel when, for example, they were, happy about the death of Hassan Nasrallah. So the thing is, a lot of the times when we see these particular things, people just generalize about them, because they think that, oh, anybody who's with us, we are going to gain their support, but they don't read behind the particular lines. I was actually, right before this podcast, I was doing quite a bit of research when it came to the whole notion of Shia resistance against Israel, and a lot of the times when looking at the particular sort of notions of it, you see degrees of insincerity, and this isn't just a matter of putting down Shias just for being Shias, from having a theological differences. This is actually looking at particular patterns of history. When we think about Salahuddin, Salahuddin is one of the best case studies one could take when it comes to Philistine. He was someone who basically, before, even prior to fighting the Crusaders at a larger scale, dismantled the Fatimid government in Egypt, claimed it for himself, and managed to unify Egypt and Syria before actually, seeking the true Nusra at the end of the day, which was, of course, gaining Al Quds. The thing is that in the whole notion of Syria, a lot of the times we fail to recognize that there were disproportionate degrees of war crimes, be it killing, rape, torture, being conducted by Bashar al-Assad, by his Shabiha, by his allies. And I remember having actually a discussion, a debate with one brother, Sunni brother. But the thing is, he was very pro Bashar al-Assad just because he was generalizing this notion that, hey, Assad is supporting the resistance in Gaza. He sent a few weapons there. The thing is that they're not really looking within the lines of, hey, at the end of the day, there's a lot of people playing the game of politics, of siyasat, and trying to gain legitimacy after they lost all the legitimacy, to cover the blood that is on their hand by showing the hand that doesn't have blood. So this was, of course, a big analysis, but at the end of the day, I was just giving some case studies to understand, and people should do their own research when it comes to staying away from generalizations.
Yeah, of course, bro. I think generalizations in itself, I think it's probably a little lazy. And I think, to be honest with you, the whole discussion in terms of the Shia and stuff you brought up, I think it would be suitable for
Yeah,
another episode because I think I have some views as well. I don't think they are contrary to yours. I don't think they're in opposition to yours, but it would be interesting maybe to have a discussion on that. But because I know due to time, and that's why I want to sort of get back to this topic. And you mentioned about the Muslims, you mentioned about Islam, you mentioned about the Ummah, and that's why I think it's important when we think about international community. If you look
hmm
at it through the lens of Islam, literally there are two sides. There is Islam, there are Muslims, and there is Kufr, and there are Kuffar.
hmm
You know what I mean? Now, obviously, it doesn't this doesn't mean that there's this constant hostility. It just means that's the base fact, right? And that's not trying to insult anyone, that's just the truth. From
yeah,
Muslims, that's how we view it. It doesn't matter whether it's China, it's Russia, the US, they all fall into what we would call the kuffar. And obviously, if we had a state today, we would have Darul Islam and we'd have Darul Kufr. So what's important is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells in the Quran that indeed this ummah of yours is one ummah, and I am your Lord, so worship me. So I think that's something that's really key. And at least linked to what you were talking about, where Muslims shouldn't be looking at to these institutions, whether it is international law, ICC, ICJ, whether it's the international community for justice, when in fact you should look at the Sharia, and the Sharia is telling you that you are one ummah, right?
hmm
You are capable of sorting out your own problems. You are capable of overcoming the obstacles. But there are prerequisites, and that is that we have to have that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right?
hmm
But certainly for us to think that the Muslims can remain idle in what's happening in Palestine, and that somehow the international community or these Western institutions are going to come and give justice to the Palestinians, this is something which is, you'd say, ludicrous,
hmm
you know?
yeah,
And to be honest with you, bro, just to get your thoughts, I mean, you know what? What they're talking about now is the next step really is going to be the West Bank is going to be officially under, the sovereignty of the Zionist state.
yeah,
And the next thing, bro, look, at the end of the day, this isn't no conspiracy theory. There are talks about this, and you will know about this, I'm sure you will, that they feel they're closer than ever to demolish Masjid al-Aqsa and build that third temple, bro. So that's not something which seems like some sort of far-fetched theory or conspiracy theory, right? That's something
yeah,
which the Zionists themselves feel they are closer than ever.
yeah. SubhanAllah. This reminds me of something. A lot of the times, there's one theme that is being mentioned, and it's this idea of inferior complexity that, sadly, a lot of Muslimin have when it comes to relying on these international communities, on relying on these international institutions. And the thing is that when we look at our kalima, la ilaha illallah, the first part is negation. The reason why it's a negation is because before we even affirm the oneness of Allah, we have to negate the other degrees of claims to quwwat, the claims to power. So the thing is, at the end of the day, when we sincerely say La ilaha illallah, and you mentioned this, having this iman and having this degree of sincerity and faith, we have to really realize that we are capable on our own, with the risk that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. This is something that's very important, very imperative. And when it comes to, Gaza, like, it's so small, or as Muslimin, we don't have a Khilafah, which is, of course, something very important. The thing is that we have to look at Sirah. We have to look at how Rasulullah ﷺ started off literally in Dar al Arqam, and then made the state of Medina, and then made that such a powerful state that literally expanded all over the Arabian Peninsula, and then, of course, further on to Syria, Persia, Iraq, Egypt, to Anatolia, to countless places I can mention. So the thing is that in Gaza, of course, we have the famous case of Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, rahimahullah, and Sheikh Ahmed Yassin followed that particular path of making the masajid into a center of hidayah. He had his concept of having a Dal ar Arqam, the leader of let's just say the current resistance of Hamas, of course. He followed that. He took a lot of the Mujahideen in on October 7th. They were actually literally learning Quran from Sheikh Ahmed Yassin. Subhanallah, they were literally learning the matters of deen. They were learning the matters of amal, how to basically become that sort of degree of Muslim and Mujahid. So the thing is that it's important to understand the years of efforts that it takes. And although we do want immediate results, and as Muslimin, if we have to defend, we have to take up, we have to take up, um, you know, we have to take up necessary means of defense. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the long term of things, as Muslimin, we have to rely on Allah and also Allah's criterion, and seek inspiration through the seerah, just as Sheikh Ahmed Yassin started.
Subhanallah, bro. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, that they wish to refer legislation to Taghut, right?
Mhm.
They wish, whilst, they were commanded to reject it. And to be honest with you, in this context, ICC, international law, international community, from an Islamic point of view, is Taghut. When you link it to the Shahada, La, that negation,
Yeah.
this is part of that negation. This is what we negate, right? So I think this is part of the problem. However, you know what, bro? I'm not sure about your personal interactions, but Alhamdulillah, not just in the Muslim world or amongst Muslims, there are so many non-Muslims
Yep.
who are questioning, who are questioning their, not, I want to say purpose in life. Obviously, there are, and many have become Muslim. But I'm talking about generally just questioning the values that they carry, which they seemed made them better. I don't mean in a bad way, but they just felt like they were in a position to, you know, uh, call themselves righteous when it comes to morals and values, and now they're questioning themselves, thinking, for 14 months now a genocide has been committed, and our leaders, our representatives, the people we vote, have colluded in this genocide, and all these institutions that we have held, in high regard to bring about peace and justice in the world
Mhm.
are actually, I wouldn't even say useless. They are designed to actually only support the interest of a few. So they're not useless. They are used, but they're used in the interest of the West, in the interest of America and those few nations that we're talking about. So I think it's important when we go back, and it's beautiful how you said, bro, that when we look at the Shahada, and I mean the example of the Seerah is a great one. However, what you said about the Shahada is something, bro, which is even more fundamental, because it's something that as Muslims we say every single day. We say it every single day,
Yeah.
right? But do we really truly understand it? Because if we did, um, if Muslims understood the Shahada, and not just understood it in the sense where they have information, but it became a concept, a deep-rooted concept where now this affected their behavior, you would see that it's impossible for something like the Gaza to happen if the Muslims were at that level. It's impossible, bro. And I think that's something which is
Yeah.
which is really important. That what we should do as Muslims is we should put our trust in the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the justice of Islam. Allah tells us that today I have perfected your deen. So this is something which, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a perfect system that justice isn't flawed like man-made systems are, right? But bro, just to I want to give you the opportunity because I know we need to end soon. I want to give you the opportunity to add to what I've just said. Also, share some other thoughts you have, before we bring the podcast to a close.
So once again, the whole notion of La ilaha illallah, I would just re-emphasize it at the end of the day to conclude. The thing is that when we negate any degree of power, any degree of reliance except in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this doesn't just only affect us, but as you said, it also affects other non-Muslims to start to question their values, especially when we express it outwardly. So the thing is that it's as you mentioned, like subhanAllah, there's a whole, although this genocide has occurred, the sweet news is that it has allowed dawah to continue.
Subhanallah, bro. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that they plot and plan, but Allah is the best of planners. So, bro, just to get your thoughts then on a question, which is what we started with.
Yeah.
Should we expect any justice from the ICC in regards to the arrest warrant? And obviously, we've been through a whole podcast, so a quick yes or no would suffice.
The answer, of course, is no. SubhanAllah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deal with all those who were complicit in this genocide in this life and the akhirah. We should always wish for both. Because at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's justice will triumph everybody else's claim to justice.
Subhanallah, bro. Subhanallah. So what I'm gonna do, bro, is bring the podcast to a close, and because of time, to be honest with you, I feel like I was just warming up, just getting your views. Really thoroughly enjoyed your views, bro. Honestly, and it's a shame that this podcast is going to be a short one compared to how long they normally are. But when we have more time, I think we'll record on again when you have a bit more time, inshallah. Because I would want to delve into some of the other things which we talked about, but I kind of like pushed to the side a little because of time. And like I said, I really benefited from this from your thoughts, and I'm sure
Likewise.
people who are listening and watching this, they've truly benefited. So to all people listening, watching, if you benefited from the podcast, please make sure you share this with your family and friends, and also if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Brother Abdul Ahad, it's been a pleasure. It's taken a long time to get you back on. I know things have been happening on your side, but may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make everything easy for you. And inshallah, we'll do it again soon, man.
Inshallah, barakallah fiqh, bro. And alhamdulillah that we were able to do this.
Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah. Let's end this before your internet connection fully goes because it sounds like it's dying. So to everyone, I
I
hope
noticed.
inshallah ta'ala until the next one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.